General quarters is the naval call to action signaling that all hands aboard a ship must immediately go to battle stations and prepare to engage the enemy. The Lepanto Institute was named for the famous Christian naval victory over Muslim invaders in 1571, and the call to general quarters at that time not only involved the sailors and soldiers in the battle, but the spiritual call to arms across Christendom. Victory at that time of deep crisis was achieved through devout recitation of the Rosary. Today, we face the darkest hour of the church which she has ever faced, and just as in 1571, it is the time for all Christians of goodwill to take up their arms, the Holy Rosary, and as we answer the call to general quarters.
Hands to quarters! Hands to quarters! Enemy ship to larboard!
Welcome to General Quarters, where faithful Christians answer the call to spiritual warfare, committing to the daily use of the weapon, the Most Holy Rosary. I'm your host, Michael Hitchborn, and I'm joined by my co-pilot, Jim Mon. Today, we're honored to have special guest, Bug Hall. Bug was a child actor, and at the age of 8, he starred in his first major film, Alfalfa, which many people across the country have seen. He navigated Hollywood. What's that?
Little Rascals. He played
Little Rascals. That's right. He navigated Hollywood depravity, but despite the horrors he endured from a very young age, Bug's story of conversion, deep spiritual devotion, and commitment to faith and family is truly an inspiration for us all. Bug, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Before we start anything, I want to start with just one question. How did you get the name Bug?
Gosh. Well, a lot of different family members have different stories for how I got the name. The common one is that my mother ran a daycare out of our house, and she would lay me on the floor to try and help me get used to the kids, and she would say, "Don't step on the little bug and squish him." And little by little, the kids all started calling me Bug. It was a 24-hour daycare ran out of our house. So I grew up with these kids for quite a few years, and the name just stuck.
That is fantastic. What a great nickname.
Right. You're not kidding. That's awesome.
So before anything else, what I would like for you to do for us, if you would please just kind of give us a little background. I spent a lot of time looking at your farewell address from about a month ago. It was incredible, the things that you had to say and the way that you had to say it. I have to tell you, you spoke like a cradle Catholic, somebody who grew up with the faith. You really didn't sound like somebody who had converted and fairly recently come into the church, but somebody who actually knew and understood her teachings for a very long time, to a very deep level. So if you would please, in order for us to understand the context of your conversion, I think it's necessary for us to know a little bit about your background. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, but could you tell us a little bit about your background? Were you raised in a Christian household? What was it like being a child actor? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Real quick to touch on your note about knowing the faith. I've been really fortunate, really blessed to be surrounded by so many great Catholics in my conversion. So many really brilliant men who have degrees and who are much smarter than me. So I've been blessed there. As far as my backstory goes, I grew up a normal kid in Texas. There was a lot of us in a small house, and I wasn't raised in a Christian home. It was pretty standard secular house. Good mother. My mother was separated from my biological father from before I can remember. And that was it. Like I said, she ran a daycare out of the house, and so there were always kids around, and it was a pretty happy home. When I was 8, there was this big audition for Little Rascals, and Spielberg wanted to have a nationwide open call. He wanted non-actors playing these roles. When he saw the original show, he had the brilliance to say, look, what made the original show great was that these kids were just regular kids. None of them were actors. None of them had that kind of actor quality to them. So he went around and found normal kids all over the country. 10,000 kids auditioned for Alfalfa. And my sister was at a dance studio taking clogging, and they had a little flyer up on the wall. And because my mom ran a daycare, I was used to watching the Little Rascals. It was we watched, I think, The Sound of Music, the Little Rascals, and something else. That was about it, right? So I knew it inside and out. I was like, I can do that. I can go be Alfalfa. So I cut my rat's tail off and had someone hot iron my hair up, and I went, and one callback after another. I ended up in Los Angeles, meeting with Steven Spielberg and Penelope Spheres, who directed it. And I got the job, and my life changed overnight. That was, it's weird looking back on it, because it was something that never seemed abnormal to me. I was never nervous. I never had this sense that it might not happen. When I was waiting in line for 4.5 hours for the first audition, I just kept saying, yeah, well, I feel bad for all these other kids because I'm going to go be Alfalfa, and that's just what's going to happen. And it always felt that way to me. And I showed up on set after weeks of rehearsals, and the whole process just seemed like it was supposed to happen. I remember that sense so vividly. I also remember being super excited. I mean, I came from a really, really normal home, and I had a lot of trauma before I started acting. I had been abused by my biological father growing up, and so it was something I felt like I was leaving behind. I mentioned in my video, there was this really strong sense of like escape. Like I'm out of this place where I have this dark secret, and I have to feel bad all the time, and I got on set, and it was like magic, man. I mean, if you've ever been on a movie set, I don't know anyone that can visit a movie set and not see it as this really magical, whimsical kind of place. I've always loved it. I always describe it like this. It's like a beehive on a set. Like there's 150, 200 people all doing their jobs, and everything just works in perfect. You know what it is? It's like order. I mean, as Catholics, we're so drawn to order, and we strive to bring about order. And a movie set is so ordered. It's so regimented. Everyone knows what they're doing, and that really spoke to me as a kid.
Wow, that's awesome. Something I have to say is that you mentioned that your sister was doing clogging. I actually did clogging when I was a kid, so that's yeah, it's funny. Well, here in Virginia, clogging is actually a pretty big thing. So we were part of a clogging troupe. My sister and my mother and I we did clogging for, gosh, I want to say like 4 or 5 years.
You might have run into my sister because she traveled, and I know she was in Virginia. She was on a traveling clogging team for quite a while. So
wow,
yeah.
That's funny. So you went from abuse in the household to kind of abuse in Hollywood. And you had a lot of struggles there, and obviously you had some your own difficulties as well. But through that dark time, if you could just kind of guide us through how dark it got, and then how you wound up actually being introduced and finding the Catholic faith. If you could just talk to that a little bit.
Yeah. So it wasn't every project, but from project to project. Little Rascals, I guess I should mention for people who haven't seen my video, within a few weeks or so of starting filming, there were two men on set who started sexually abusing me. And I remember a strong sense of despair and anger. I remember thinking like, man, I didn't escape this after all. I remember feeling very angry. And even at that time, my anger was very, very centered on this idea that like I wasn't being protected, and that really stuck with me for the majority of my life after that was that strong sense of wanting to have been protected, right? So, and then from project to project, it was always various men who usually worked in higher up positions. I've spent years. I want to touch on this because it's really important for anyone that hasn't seen my video. I have spent years trying to recall precisely who these people were. I've gone through IMDb and tried to recognize names and faces, and at the end of the day, I'm not willing to trust the memory of an 8-year-old kid 30 years later with someone's life, right? So the reason that I don't think at this point I would make any specific accusations, because the chance of me being wrong, I think, is pretty good, and that would absolutely destroy someone's life in a way that I would be severely wrong, right? So
Yeah. Bug, if I could, that's actually very powerful, and I admire that very much. If there's one thing if you could speak to this a little bit, it just seems to me that two elements here. Number one is Hollywood is saturated with these evil people, right? Number one. Number two is culling the herd. It just seems to me that these guys are adept and expert at finding that kid, or do you think it's more along the lines of they're throwing a blanket or what they're casting a wide net? Do you have a thought on that? I just think it's central. You know,
I've talked to a lot of people who have been in my position, who were in my position as kids, and all of them unanimously agree that there's definitely some sort of sixth sense that these guys have for sort of picking out the wounded kids, or the ones who are more susceptible to being abused. It's hard to say exactly. They have some vision that they can just sort of see those wounded kids who have been through things like this. And there's also a common thing with the kids that go through that, to rebel and lash out. And, for years I thought about that, and the modern psychology, which I really despise modern psychology, but the modern psychology would say, it's they're self-medicating, but I don't really think that's what it is. I think you put up these guards. I think you learn to be dangerous, like a Amazonian lizard with the bright colors, right? And it works. And I mean, that the reason that almost every kid that goes through this takes on that kind of a persona, whether it's, some goth look or whatever, or, tough biker kid or whatever the case is, you put up a dangerous exterior to let people know I'm not easily messed with. And I think that because I went through years and years of drug abuse and alcohol abuse, I think that comes with the crowd. You want to be accepted. That crowd suddenly becomes your protection. It becomes your safety group. For me, it was hanging out with the crew. Was one thing is the crew on movie sets are always the normal guys, right? They're always the more conservative minded. Typically, they're family guys. They're just working men. And a lot of them are, rough and tumble biker types, or the transpo guys are always, rough guys. But so I kind of dove into that group and made them my protection. As far as the systemic abuse in Hollywood of children, over the years, I've talked to a lot of other child actors, and you never really talk about it explicitly. There's like this weird thing where it'll get brought up in a roundabout way. One of my best friends growing up was a kid named Brad Renfro, who, when I first met him, he was like my hero, right? He was the toughest, coolest kid on the planet. He was smoking cigarettes at, 13 and, drinking whiskey. And I wanted to be like him, and nobody messed with Brad. Brad would show up on a set and he would shout down any producer, any direct. I mean, no one messed with Brad. And looking back, that's what I admired about him. I admired that he was so tough. He was impervious to attack. And and me and him grew very close over the course of the movie that we did together. And he was like a big brother to me. And we were friends for years after that. But there was a moment on that movie when he pulled me aside. We were talking about something, and I was having trouble with some producer or something, and he kind of laid into this brotherly lecture about don't let anyone hurt you. Don't let anybody, there's going to be people in this town that are going to try to come after you, and they're going to try to do things to you. And at the time, I remember being so aware of what he meant. And it was the only time I ever saw him vulnerable. This is the first time I've thought about that memory in a long time, but Brad ended up overdosing and dying years and years later, which was hard for me, but it also kind of shook me out of my complacency in my own personal problems. It was one of the things that very imminently led to my getting sober. I think this problem is very wide in Hollywood. I think it's something that is still a taboo subject. People don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about. I think it's a very common problem. I really do.
You mentioned that.
I'll say this. I won't say specifically who, but the day I released my video, one of the other Little Rascals actually called me and expressed to me that he said, thank you for being bold and releasing this video, and just so you know, the same thing happened to me on that set and throughout my childhood as well. And I just want to thank you for talking about it. So, I mean, I think you could cast a pretty wide net over child actors in Hollywood and catch quite a few who have been through what I've been through.
Wow. You mentioned that you had a natural connection or a natural attraction to the more family oriented men on the set. So the crew, the people who were basically working behind the scenes. You said they were more conservative, they were more family oriented. So you always had, it would seem, kind of a natural disposition, a natural draw toward the family centric, the family oriented, what would be properly described as the Christian disposition. And do you think that natural draw is what led you to Christianity and ultimately to the Catholic Church?
Yeah, in a roundabout way, which I'll circle back around and touch on that. But I'll say that I think every kid who comes from any sort of trauma has that draw. I was always searching for father figures or for family units that would sort of take me in and pretend to adopt me for a short period of time. And that's very common for, I think for most kids that go through that. And I was fortunate enough to have a lot of that over the years. There were lots of families who would let me be part of their Thanksgivings and their holidays and would sort of take me under their wing. And I would always screw it up, right? As an addict and an alcoholic, I would eventually do something to distance myself from the people that cared about me. But I'd be willing to bet that if you looked at all the kids that have been through this kind of trauma, you would see them searching for those family units. And now circling back around, it was one of those family units that ended up being part of my conversion. I was working with somebody at the time who was very close with his family. He also grew up in Hollywood, and his family was very, very close knit. Mom and dad always on set with him, always took care of him. And I so greatly admired that. And as we worked together, I grew closer and closer with his family. And he ended up going through a conversion. He worked with some Catholics, and I was frustrated at first because I thought I was losing my business partner, my writing partner. I suddenly had this sense that he was falling into this weird cult, right? So, and he would come back all excited and tell me that the new things he was learning, and there was a lot of stuff tied up in it. One, I didn't want it to interfere with our work together, and then two, there was a pride in me because I had always kind of read what I thought were intellectually intellectually spiritualized things, Joseph Campbell and Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And I was always trying to give him this stuff to read. And so when he suddenly found this other thing, I was like, oh, I had to poo-poo it, right? And then as he dove further and further and actually started living trying to live what he was excited about, there was a part of me that definitely admired it as well. At one point, this is a funny story. At one point, he changed our regiment, because we were very strictly regimented. Up, 6:30, breakfast, and then straight to writing. He changed our regiment. He started going to morning mass at 6 a.m. And so, to spite him, I said, well, we have our routine. So, I mean, if you're going to change it, I guess, what does that mean? I guess I just got to go to this thing with you every morning. All right, fine, I'll go. Which he didn't even ask, right? But I just kind of imposed myself on it, because I wanted to make sure that he knew, I'm not going to be shaken off so easily, right? So the irony is, for probably 9 months before my conversion, I was going to morning mass and sitting there like this. I think I even probably left my hat on for the first month. So about a year goes by, and I was constantly trying to argue with this guy, and he wasn't arguing with me. I would just find arguments online that I thought were good arguments, and for me, they were mostly historical arguments. That was I was a big history buff at the time, so I was sort of digging through Catholic history, and I didn't want to present weak arguments, which means that I ended up not finding any good arguments, because as you look through Catholic history, all the clubs that the secular world uses to beat Catholics with, when you really dive into them, you realize that the Catholic Church was pretty much right every step of the way. Whether you look at the Crusades or the Spanish Inquisition or Galileo, any of these things that the secular world says, oh, the Catholic Church did such an evil thing, then it turns out that it's just propaganda, right? It turns out that if you really dive into the history, the Catholic Church remains the most beautiful thing in the history of the world.
Wow. Hey, yeah, I would agree with you. Bug, I got to ask you, if I could just fast forward a little bit, because I found your testimony online absolutely compelling. And one of the things you said that actually blew me away was I had habituated cowardice with my silence. Right. So what I was saying is, we kind of went through your background a little bit. Now you're a kid actor in Hollywood, right? And then all of a sudden, you're going to mass with this guy. And could you talk a little bit? I was hoping we could get to the point, because as I said, this really affected me. If we could get to the point where you move forward, you met a certain priest who changed your life, right? And you came to the realization, and that's what was that line I used, I had habituated cowardice in my silence, which to me, much like your entire testimony, was incredibly courageous, quite honestly. Can you address that a little bit?
Yeah. So, long story short, I ended up getting invited to this conference with a Catholic priest. He was an exorcist who, at the time, he was out of Oklahoma. Now he's out of Denver. And the guy's got a brain this big. He's a brilliant mind. And I made the mistake of trying to be sort of aggressively argue with him. And within the course of that one night, I ended up being Catholic. I ended up saying, I want to be Catholic, and how do I go about it? So flash forward, I went through the process. I was baptized and confirmed and received First Communion, Easter Vigil. And I ended up working with these people who all of a sudden were not, in Hollywood, the culture is so bad that you can't survive without compromising. And a lot of times people will pick this one area that they won't compromise, and they're not even really aware of the fact that they're compromising in all these other areas. So they'll say like, well, I'm a Catholic, so I'll never do a nude scene. That's ridiculous. And then they'll go defraud 20 people of their wages and lie to investors and do all these other things, right? And so there's this, it's wherever your attachments are, right? This same priest, by the way, that converted me, he would talk about attachments as like the devil with a rag, and you're a dog, right? You bite onto this rag, and well, the dog can just pull you around. See, so the attachments, and I always found that analogy really really helpful, because that's what happens, right? Whether it's you're attached to the money or the success, or even just the status of being successful, or the acclaim of making highbrow movies, right? Movies that are interesting or nuanced, right? Which means you have to strip some of the more virtuous stuff out, and put things that as Catholics we would find abhorrent. And for a long time, I just stayed quiet. I had my own attachments. I mean, I only knew this industry. I only knew my work in Hollywood, and I couldn't imagine myself anywhere else. And I loved it. I mean, I still love it. I love the storytelling. I love the movie making part of it. I never related my work to the abuse that I experienced growing up. Those things were always separate in my mind, and so I didn't want to let go of this job that I loved so much. I mean, it really, as simplistic as that sounds, I mean, that was it. And so you do these mental gymnastics, and you say, well, I can, if I can get one movie made through this, through this process, even though I don't have anything to do with the business affairs, so if they're doing all this shady stuff, I can keep my head down, and I can just try to make the best story I can here, and it can help so many people, and I can convert hearts and convert minds by telling great stories with Catholic themes, and you lie to yourself. I think the average person lies to themselves far more than they're even aware of.
Yeah, you mentioned the cowardice of this that led to silence, and there is definitely a fear, because what happens is we become afraid of losing the things that we're attached to. You mentioned the attachments, so you're afraid of losing the things that we're attached to. And I in the line of work that we have here at the Lepanto Institute, we're always looking at how the Catholic Church, or I should say men within the Catholic Church, bishops, priests, and so forth, and they have this attachment to status, they have an attachment to money, they have an attachment to certain things, and a lot of times they remain absolutely silent in the face of grave moral evils. We find that Catholic agencies like the Catholic Campaign for Human Development or Catholic Relief Services are involved in the promotion of contraception or abortion. And even in spite of seeing the evidence, these priests, these bishops, they either just don't say anything. They back off, they keep their mouths shut, or they go a step further and they actually defend the activities, or they lie about it. So it seems that what you experienced in this regard is a layman's actualization of the same problem that is facing us in the entire universal church. Can you speak to that for just a moment?
Yeah. So a lot of people will look at the problems that we have with the bishops and the priests, and I think I think a lot of times people are unaware of their own contribution, right? I was a coward for a long time as this was going on, and I was very aware of it. In fact, when it started happening to me through this same group, I didn't speak up, even though I had at that time, I now had a new family to support and everything else. I didn't speak up because of my shame in not having spoken up so many other times. And I suddenly I didn't want to be a hypocrite, right? And so the self-protection mode kicks in, and you go, well, if I can't be a hypocrite, and therefore, and this is all so subconscious, right? You're not even so fully aware of it, but you're like, I was thinking, if I speak up, and I hadn't spoken up 20 other times, well, then I'm just being selfish, right? There's no real virtue there. And so I let it happen to me, and on and on. And the kicker was when a convicted child molester ended up being invited to set with the full knowledge of these people. And that just kind of shook me out of my apathy. That was the that was the gut punch and he was a, this potential investor, and, he's done his time, he served his time. So this is, it's fine. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Why are you making a problem out of this? And I just went, this has nothing to do with them, right? The problem was they're irrelevant to my own complacency, right? And my own being complicit in the actions. And I suddenly felt a deep sense of shame that I was just contributing. And the reality is, St. Augustine talks about this, like there's no evil that any of us wouldn't commit if not for grace, right? So you can try and look at these things proportionately and say, well, this is less than this, and this isn't this. But the reality is, you remove grace, and on a long enough timeline, we'll have committed every evil known to man, right? And I was suddenly just so painfully aware of that, and it scared the heck out of me.
That's actually what I was getting to, because as someone like myself, the reason I asked this question, I think a lot of people are resonating with this at home, is that I've gone through it myself. I worked on Wall Street. I was a guy who didn't have any money, and as a in my 20s and making your way out of college, and then you start to feel and experience some of the cash and prizes. Guess what? You're invested now.
Mm-hmm.
People treat you differently. They automatic respect. Now you're invested in the world. And you said something which is so powerful to me. Another thing you said was the line between good and evil runs down the center of every human heart. It's kind of like that Jungian theory of the shadow man. Mm-hmm. And the beauty of Catholicism, and frankly, what you were saying is, if you don't recognize that, if you don't recognize there, but for the grace of God go I, like to what Aquinas was saying, you're useless. I'll make that simple, because then you're in denial, and then you're not, you don't have the ability to be accountable with the eyes of God. And that's, again, I loved what you were saying. I really did. Please continue.
I just suddenly was so, God's so good to us. I loved these people from the deepest place. They were my family. And it was because I loved them that I was able to suddenly flip the script and look at myself. I think if they weren't people that I loved, I could have so easily just scapegoated them and been like, "Oh, I'm so glad to be out of there," But my heart was broken, and a broken heart is a useful thing. I didn't have anything left to hold up, right? I had no more pretenses. I was able to just very plainly look at myself, and I didn't like what I saw. I daily mass going and the whole thing, but my first goal just wasn't heaven. I was just aware of it, I don't care how that sounds. It's just the truth. The reality is, I think that's relatively common. I think a lot of people have short-term goals and medium-term goals and long-term goals that all take precedent, and it's hard to figure out. It's hard to figure out what that balance is. And I think the only way through that, it finally hit me. By the way, months later, I took a long time to try and figure out what was going on with me. Months later, I realized there is no balance. All of the saints are extremists. They're all radical. And when you give that example to people, especially smart daily mass going Catholics, a lot of times you'll get the response of like, well, yeah, but that's St. Francis. Are you so arrogant as to say that you should be acting like St. Francis? I mean, come on. Well, yeah, maybe we should. Maybe we should just pick up our cross and boldly go out into the world and live the faith as if we're going to actually die tomorrow, and as if nothing in this world really matters, and let the chips fall where they may, right? And that just struck me so profoundly. And it was a whole bunch of things in a 6 to 9 month period that really helped that idea crystallize. I assisted on some exorcisms, which helped to really shake me even further out of that apathy and make me realize that we're fooled with this false dichotomy, right? It's like, we can live our faith or the world. There is nothing else. Like, it's only salvation. This whole world only exists as a place in which we can worship God, right? That's its purpose. There is nothing else. And when you see the demonic so face to face, you realize that there's no other option but salvation.
I'd like for you to get into that story just a little bit, but before you do, I kind of want to give our viewers a sense of the timeline here. Like, at about what time were you introduced to the faith? How long did it take for you to convert? When did you meet your wife? When did you start a family? All that stuff. So if you could just kind of break down the timeline for us, I think that'll give us a good context for everything.
So I converted in 2013. From the moment I sort of had that intellectual conversion, that debate with this priest, they had told me I had to go a year of RCIA, which is like Catholic formation, whatever. And I didn't want to. I just knew I knew I wouldn't make it. I had talked with some close friends of mine at the time, and this priest. I talked about some of the truths of the faith and grace specifically, and I really understood. What drew me mostly to the faith was this idea that I had been searching for a manual to existence. And the Catholic faith is the only human manual. It's like it should come with every new human, right? We should just get a little Catholic human manual. It's just so accurate, and all of a sudden I realized that that's home. Right? If they wrote the book on how to be a human being, and they understand every single quirk of human nature so profoundly and so perfectly, that must be the truth. And yeah, so I didn't want to go through RCA. I knew that I would lie to myself. I have been most of my life a cowardly person. I've learned to hide and to run away. Run away is a big one. So I knew that pain would come, that suffering would come, that letting loose of things that I didn't want to let loose of would come, and I would quit. I knew I would. So I begged this abbey down in Southern California. I begged them to baptize me in a month, which was Easter. And they said, well, if you come every single day, you don't miss a day, and you talk to the priests here and you learn, we'll give you a little lesson. And if you can convince the abbot that you were ready by Easter, then we'll baptize you. And so I did. I made the 1.5-hour drive down every day and learned the faith, and was baptized that Easter. Very, very quickly after my baptism, my phone's ringing off the hook, and all the devil's throwing all the lines out to reel me back in. Right? Hollywood it's just no place for a Catholic. It's just not. And I went and lived in the desert for 6 months, out in Mojave. I just put up a cot. There's no weather out there, so you don't have to worry about shelter. And I just slept in the desert, and I would drive into town occasionally, for mass and for to have conferences with these Catholics that would do these conferences and stuff. And that was it. I just lived out there and just kind of purged. No phone reception was great. And after that 6 months, I just realized I needed to go home. So I went home to Texas for about a year. I worked on a ranch with my brother. I didn't spend a lot of time with my family growing up because I was always gone working. And I just wanted to, we were close, but I missed so much time with them. So I just wanted to spend time with them. So I worked on this ranch and just tried to live my faith, and I was very much at peace. And then after that year was when I got the call, hey, come on out. We need help with this, start this company. And I took the call, and ended up back in Hollywood. Right after getting back to LA, I met my wife at a theology philosophy conference, and she was. I knew the first night I met her that I was gonna marry her. And she raised her hand and asked a question, and that was the first time I noticed her. The funny thing is I didn't remember what she looked like. I just remembered this grace. You know, there was just this this beauty and grace to her, and how she asked the question, and her demeanor, and I just knew. I asked around and figured out who she was. Turns out she went to daily mass at a church nearby that I often went to daily mass. So I might have started going to daily mass there a little more often. And we started courting. I asked her dad if I could court her. Her dad lived in Ohio, so I had to find an excuse to go up there. And he laughed at me because he didn't know what courting was. And I think I cracked a joke about trading him some goats in exchange for courting his wife or his daughter, and that was it. Flash forward. Well, she wanted to go in the convent. She thought she might wanted to be a nun, so I dropped her off at the convent. I was like weeks away from proposing. I was like, all right. So I dropped her off. I went back to Texas for a short period of time. Flash forward, she's not going to be a nun. We decided to get married. I think that pretty much catches us up to, I worked for another year and a half or so, 2 years before deciding to quit. So that was about the time frame.
Wow. One of the things that you talked about when we talked before, just kind of prepping for the show and talking about a little bit about your background, one of the things that you talked about, and I thought it was a fantastic story, and I'd like for you to tell it again, was when you were going to this theology forum with the Exorcist, and you were kind of, sitting in the back with your arms folded, and you were kind of arguing with the priest. If you could retell that story, I thought it was so awesome the way it unfolded. If you could just retell it, that would be great.
Yeah. So, going back, I wasn't a Catholic yet, and I was working on this. I was writing this movie with a friend of mine, and the movie was centered around addiction and vice, with this sort of group of young people, and we were just struggling with the character arcs. And every movie is a value system, so every movie is very much decided by human nature, and so the particulars of how a person goes from one set of values to another set of values. That's what makes a story fantastic. And so my friend said, "Hey, I know this guy. He's a psychologist, and he's really brilliant, and he's written a book, and people, his book is used in colleges, and he's doing a conference on vice and how it affects our decision making and the negative effects of it on the human psychology." And I said, "Oh, wow, that sounds interesting. Yeah, that could really help us here with this story." And so I get in the car and we go, and when we get there, it's a Catholic priest, and I kind of felt like I had been duped a bit. And I said, and he said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you, he's a Catholic priest." And I said, "Well, I won't hold that against him, I guess." Keep in mind, my ego is like, through the roof. So I sat down, and I just kind of sat through these things. He's going through the 7 deadly sins, right? And the psychological effects of them. And in between each one, I would meet him on the balcony, and he's smoking a cigar, and he's kind of waving me off. I'm a fly buzzing in his ear, and I'm trying to draw him into some kind of argument. I want him to know I'm smarter than him, or that whatever. And we finally get to the particular 7 deadly sin that was my predominant fault. And I suddenly had this overwhelming sense that it was a setup, that this whole thing was some kind of Catholic intervention for me. And, it's just Thomism. Thomism is so accurate to human nature that it feels personal. So as I'm sitting there and I'm looking around the room, and I couldn't even think straight anymore. I was so angry. I thought to myself, my friend brought me here. He told everybody here about me and about all of my sins and how, who I am as a person and what I'm doing out there in the world. And they've set this up. It had to be a setup. It was so personal, so accurate. And I went out on the balcony afterwards, and I tried to confront this priest again, and I realized he had no idea who I was. He was just confused as to why this guy was bothering him. It was like a gut punch, and I kind of stumbled back into the room, dizzy and confused, and I sat down, and I'm looking around as all these Catholic men are all having cigars and having drinks and eating hors d'oeuvres and talking and laughing amongst themselves. And I realized nobody was looking at me. Nobody cared who I was or what I was doing there. I was just a guy that was invited. And that was the big crack. That was like the crack in the persona that let grace in. And I sat and listened to the rest of it with I think an open mind and an open heart. And I was really shook to the core about the particular vice that was so accurate to me. And, I had already started thinking about those sins, not as sins, but because I had been sober for 5 years or 4 years at the time, whatever it was. When you sin, you hurt people. I mean, that's it. And I had started to become aware of the fact that I had hurt so many people. And I didn't know how to cope with that, because the world taught me one thing. The world taught me that as long as your intentions are plain and, it's what's the old communist version of this, right? It's the glass of water theory. It's just like sharing a glass of water. It's, it's all normal human stuff. But why did it always end in so much pain and suffering? And that was already a problem for me, because I couldn't drink it away. I didn't have enough vices at that point to hide behind. So when this priest got on that subject, just made sense. It was suddenly very true. And that was a hard part of my conversion, because I didn't go through this tears of joy and whatever. I was just pissed off for months. I was really angry that I finally found the truth. One, I wanted something much cooler, right? Like, why couldn't it have been something unique? And then, of course, as you dive into the faith, it's the coolest thing in the world, right? I mean, there's so much. It's like this beautiful tapestry that is seamless, and you can't pull on one single thread, and you can dive into the Catholic history forever and never run out of stuff. I mean, the Catholic Church is, if you want an interesting subject to study, you will never run out of studies. But anyways, so I was also angry that the world lied to me, that it was 180 degrees the opposite of what it meant to be a man. I was taught one thing, and the truth was the exact opposite. And I knew that all of a sudden I had all of this garbage to contend with. And I knew that it was going to be hard, and I was really angry about that.
Wow. Doug, I got to ask you a question, because you just hit upon something that really kind of grabbed me. You're in the middle of Hollywood, and you're going to these parties. Your background, you knew a lot of people, A-list kind of stuff. So, you have to figure that you reference the history of the Catholic Church and the beautiful philosophy and theology, right? So you talk about Aquinas's God, hole-shaped, with a God-shaped hole in all of our hearts, right?
Yeah.
And now you're in Hollywood, where they have that zeal trying to fill that God-shaped hole with insanity. Like, and the more it's not working, it seems, the more they double down at the blackjack table, right? Yeah. And I really, like, I got to tell you, before you came on, and we talked before, I mean, it was really cool. I was listening to what you were saying, and it was brilliant. So here's my question, I guess, if you could touch upon this, because for me, in my own personal journey, it kind of went like this. I noticed, and I get the sense you do too, I noticed, like, these people are not only not happy, there's something wrong. Like, there's something like intrinsically disordered. They're not making any sense. There's no rationale to it. And then you dive into the church a little bit, you see beautiful sequential logic, God makes demands of us. And then you go down this path. And I guess my question is, for me, it really culminated into the concept of exorcism and things like Fatima and beautiful things like, the miracle of the sun. And I was hoping you had a couple of stories, not to put you on the spot, but a little bit about, you were actually in a few of these things. And if you wouldn't mind maybe touching upon that a little bit.
In a few of what things specifically?
Like you had helped out, as an assistant, and you were right there and you prayed. And I've spoken to these guys too, and that's really, really powerful. These guys are as sane as anybody else. And they're like, oh yeah, this happened,
Yeah. So the priest that converted me was an exorcist, and he'll very candidly tell stories about his work. And being a guy that, had pretty shortly come from this secular world, it's interesting how the intellect can believe something, and you haven't fully appropriated the truth of it, right, into your being. Because he would tell these stories, and he's got 6 master's degrees, and he's one of the smartest people I've ever met, one of the holiest people I've ever met. He's a great man, just naturally, he's a great man. And so there's not a single part of me that could possibly think he's lying. It would be as ridiculous as the sun not coming up tomorrow, right? And yet, flash forward years later, this was pretty recent. This was sort of the final catalyst to my decision to leave Hollywood permanently. I got invited to assist at an exorcism. Or multiple exorcisms. I was visiting a friend of mine, and I said, hey, I'm really trying to figure out what to do, right now. And he said, well, come hang out with me. He's an exorcist. He said, why don't you stay at my place for a couple of days, clear your head. We can talk, smoke pipes at night and talk and hang out. And I said, okay, that sounds great. And he said, well, I'm going to be working during the day, and that'll be great because you can help me out. You can come help me out. And I hadn't ever been invited to assist at an exorcism, even though I knew lots of exorcists over the years. And I said, okay, yeah, cool. All right. And I knew, that the inordinate curiosity, is dangerous. And so I said, I'm just going to just do what he says and just go. And, I'm not going to dive too much into it. I'm not going to try not to think too much about it. But you get there, and the first 30 minutes was horrifying in the true sense of the word. It was horrifying. Because it's exactly like the movies. Almost exactly what you would expect in your wildest imagination. And I remember thinking, I remember realizing in that moment that I didn't fully believe anyone when they talked about it, that there was some part of me that was like a switch that was sort of turning off, fully believing them. Because it shouldn't have shocked me the way it did, but it's one of the most shocking experiences I've ever had in my entire life, if not the most shocking experience. The fun part, though, is it was like a movie on the side of the demonic. Exactly all the things you expect: the animal noises and the body contorting into ways that are not physically possible, and the horrible things that'll come out of these seemingly normal people's mouths. And then obviously the obvious stuff, them arguing in Latin with the priest and whatever else. But the side that is not like the movies is The Exorcist. It's not this grave. He's always in movies. He's always portrayed as like tentative or a bit afraid or nervous, or there's a somber sense. And this guy was just laughing and poking fun and just razzing this monster until it broke. It was that's what kind of pulled me out of the sense of horror. It was 30 minutes of like, and then the more I watched him, he's just laughing and he's poking fun, and he's at one point he's telling the demon to kiss the Holy Cross, and it was like, a long period of the thing not wanting to kiss the Holy Cross. It was a first-class relic of the cross. And he finally did. And the guy goes, that wasn't on center. I didn't like that one. Let's do it again, And it's just, it was comedic, which just shows you when you know what side you're on, there's nothing to fear, right? But there was an interesting experience. I think this might be the story you were thinking of. Is about 30 minutes into it, I was just sort of praying the Hail Mary over and over, and then I said, okay, well, I'm supposed to be here helping. I should be, really consciously doing something. And I have a strong devotion to St. Anthony. I said, I'll just start praying to St. Anthony, ask him. So I start asking for St. Anthony's intercession. And I, something very simplistic, St. Anthony, can you help here and help deliver this young woman? And all of a sudden the thing starts screaming and looking at me. And Father kind of starts looking at me in a way that made me a little nervous. And he comes over and he said, "You're not talking directly to the demon, are you?" And I said, No, I knew, I've known exorcists over the years. I know you don't do that. I said, No, of course not. No. And he said, "Okay." And he put my rosary on I was holding the leg, put my rosary up on the leg and kind of patted it and said, "Keep doing what you're doing." He goes back. And later I was like, "Father, I don't want to fall into curiosity." I was like, "But I got to know, what was that about?" And he said, "Oh, out of nowhere." He said, "These things rarely ever notice the people assisting me. They're so focused on me." He said, "All of a sudden the thing turned its focus on you and started screaming, 'Get that man off my leg. He's crushing my leg. Get him off my leg.'" So apparently St. Anthony jumped in and did a little work on this guy. So
That is absolutely astounding. I mean, it's something that should come as naturally to us as Catholics as going to mass and making the sign of the cross with holy water. But you hear about these things and you see the experience of the interplay between the demonic and the mundane, and we start to understand that, well, yeah, the spiritual world is real. The interplay between the demonic in us and the angelic and us is very real. The presence of every mass has not just us in the pews, but also all the souls in purgatory, all the saints, all the angels. They are all there, fully present in the mass with us. So you think about just that one instance, get that man off my leg. It really is St. Anthony joining you in the prayer and crushing the leg of that demon, and preventing the demon from doing what the demon wants to do. It's a direct assault on its will. So it's an amazing story, but it's such I think that the element of the comedic there that you talked about, how the priest was compelling the demon through his own will rather than being compelled through the will of God, but through his own will to kiss the cross, and then being displeased that it wasn't on center, making him do it again. I mean, it is comedic.
Jovial. It was quite fun to watch, because you realize, the final point. What he kept circling back around to is the holiness of these individuals, and how these things, these monsters, these demons, that they were the means of these people's sanctification. And he kept saying, so and so's going to heaven. You have no control over that anymore. They're going, and you're the main reason that they're getting there. And that was what these things would always lose their minds over. And I realized we're all going to do God's will in the end. Is it going to be to spite us, or is it going to be, in conformity with our will, right? Are we going to cooperate with God's will, or are we going to run contrary to it? Because no matter what, God's will is getting done. I suddenly realized I don't want to be this demon. I don't want to be looking at my life and seeing all the ways that God used me to bring about his will, and to be angry about that. I want to give everything to God. I want to be united to his will. And it was a scary moment for me, because I really took stock and I realized there's a lot to purge that has nothing to do with God. And this is what I was talking about earlier, is, it was a lot of these little steps over the last year, that just, God has really done so much for me this year, and just chipped away at all these things I was holding on to. My wife was mauled by a pit bull 6 months ago, and that was one of the things that led me to go visit this priest. Things had gotten pretty hard. She couldn't walk for a few months. And so I was trying to figure out what to do for, for a living, and trying to take care of the kids and take care of her. And I was really falling apart. And it was just one thing after another that led to this realization that I'm just holding on to all these things that don't matter. I only want God's will, and I don't want anything else. And I think there's always that. I think it's very common for us to say, I absolutely want God's will, and I want these other things. It's very common for Catholics to say, I want this, 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 so long as it's your will, God, which is fine. I'm not besmirching anyone, but that becomes so common that you forget to say, I don't even know what's good for me. I don't even know what your will is, and I'm just going to wake up tomorrow and do what's in front of me, to your glory, and with virtue, and please, God, protect me from putting any of myself in it, any of the muck and the garbage and the vice that I know I'm still riddled with. Please protect me from that, and I'm just going to do what's in front of me, whatever, because I know that's your will, right? I know that whatever you put in front of me is yours.
I think one of the most humbling things that any of us can realize is that we just don't have the ability to see what's on the other side of the ridge. We can't see around the corner. We can't see around the bend. But God, who is omnipotent and omniscient, knows the beginning, middle, and end of all things. And because of that, if we turn, and it's a very freeing thing to say, Lord, I'm not smart enough, I'm not strong enough, I'm not willful enough to be able to get to whatever end it is that I'm supposed to achieve. But you know, and you know perfectly what it is that I'm supposed to be doing, how I'm supposed to be doing it, what the outcome of that action is going to be. And we have time for just one last segment. And you had spoken when we discussed about a week ago doing this show. You mentioned that you were in the process of actually consecrating your family to Lady Poverty.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could talk a little bit about your home life, your family life. You've got a beautiful wife. You've got 3 kids? Yeah, you've got 3 kids, and you made the decision to leave the world and to live the life of what you called a radical Catholic. So if you could talk to that, and we'll close the program on that. But I think that's the real high point of this whole show. If you could just speak to that for a little bit.
Yeah, all of these recent moments were all building towards this greater realization. When I first converted, I went and lived in the desert, and I lived very simply. Then I went to Texas. I worked on a ranch. I lived very simply. And my plan, I knew then that God was calling me to live this life of poverty. At that point, I had planned to give up on Hollywood, and I turned back around from that idea because of my attachments, and it never sat right with me. I always knew that it was going to be hard to get to heaven, and the saints who also know that about themselves, there's one common denominator. They all choose poverty, every one of them. All the saints that say, I'm not getting there, like it's a long shot, they all chose poverty. And as I'm looking at these radical saints who suddenly start to make a lot more sense to me, I realized it's always the attachments that draw us back in. We make decisions, and we turn back from those decisions, and God never gives up on us, right? So God loves me. So if he has to drag me through a public scandal and my wife being mauled by a pit bull, and one thing after another, to get me back to the simple decision that he had already made so profoundly clear to me so long ago, he won't leave us alone, right? And I realized, and the irony is, my wife came to the same realization without having discussed it with me. I was mulling this thing over, and I was like, man, I know what we need to do. We need to live simply. We need to, as a family, we need to hunker down. We need to spend our time together. The deepest importance to me was always fatherhood. From early in my conversion, I wanted to be a father. I so plainly saw what great fathers do, not just to the natural world, but to building the kingdom of God. And I had this idea a long time ago that fatherhood is very different in today's world because men go to work. Their kids don't see them exercising virtue, right? Because they're gone all day. They don't see them in their most difficult moments. And then those fathers come home and they're tired. And rightfully so. It's hard to make a living in today's world, right? So again, not besmirching anyone. If you're not tired when you're coming home from work, I'd be surprised by that. But so then the kids are with their fathers in their leisure time. And sometimes the fathers are exercising heroic virtue and coming home and spending all their time with their kids, but it's still in their leisure time. It's still in this matrix of I've worked hard and I need some rest. And maybe they do some house chores, whatever. But through all of human history, the majority of kids saw their fathers all day long because the shop was either connected to the house if they were a blacksmith or a saddle maker or whatever, or they were working the field, tending the crops and tending the animals, and the kids would help. And it was the family unit was always together. And as I thought about society and what's going wrong with society and how people are so steeped in the worldliness, I realized it's because the only other natural thing that can combat that is the family. The irony is the more time you spend with your family, the more time you want to spend with them. Virtue is its own reward eventually, right? Once everything's stripped away. And so this few months that my wife couldn't walk, I was with my kids all day and my wife all day, and I fell in love with them in a whole new way. And I realized that they need me. My daughters need to see me exercising virtue. They need to see their father at home working hard and teaching them the value of the simple daily tasks, right? And I suddenly didn't see any possibility of teaching them that in the current worldly system we have today, right? Where money isn't even real, and everything you own is owned through debt, and you never really own anything, and you're on business trips, so you're home, a week and a half, 2 weeks out of each month or whatever. It suddenly didn't make any sense to me. It hit me like a ton of bricks that this whole system is designed to erode the family, and particularly the Catholic values of fatherhood. And I realized that my first scramble was, is there some job that I can do that I can still do what I'm thinking and follow my conscience? And then I realized there's not. There aren't any, at least not with my skill sets. So committing to poverty all of a sudden made sense because we had to trust God. And every day feels like an adventure now. I mean, every day we wake up, I think, so much more excited than I've ever been in my entire life. Because all of a sudden God is the center, the absolute center, right in the middle, right where that line that cuts through the center of every human heart, right between good and evil. God is suddenly right there all the time. I think a lot of people miss the opportunity to embrace poverty. Our culture is so opposed to it. Poverty is abhorrent in our culture, right? And what I mean by that is we're taught implicitly, that being poor is not just a bad thing, but something's wrong with you, right? And I think as Catholics, I think more people embracing that, especially in this culture, especially where we are now. I think that's the radical choice that a lot of people could make to kind of overturn the current order. Just check out from it, unplug, get out of the usury, get out of the wage slavery, get out. Don't participate. And I think that could radically change the world. We make up a large segment of the population. I think that could radically change the world.
Bug, your words have been incredibly inspiring. I want to thank you so much for coming on the program today and talking to us and sharing your story with our listeners, with our viewers. I really hope that what we've accomplished today is an introduction rather than a one-off. I would love to have you on to continue just discussing the things going on in the world, and your thoughts and your perspective are just they're so necessary and needed in the world today. I think that I would absolutely love to have you on the program again. I really hope that you will come on.
I would love that.
I just want to add to what Michael was saying too. I mean, you're at the mountaintop. You have credibility. You've seen what that brings, and not many people can say, well, they did have it all. You certainly did. Yet you chose a path. It's like I've heard on the Lepanto Institute many times. There's two decisions. There's only one decision, two choices: God, Satan. And it looks to me that your testimony was so powerful. That's all I want to say. I mean, I really, really enjoyed it. And what Hitch was saying, man, would love to have you back on.
I would love that. I've so greatly enjoyed this.
Fantastic. Bug, thanks so much for being on the program. Ladies and gentlemen, if you like the program and you love the content and you love what we're trying to accomplish here, please hit the subscribe button, hit like on the video, share it with all of your family and friends. Again, we want to thank Bug Hall for just joining us and giving us an incredible, inspiring message and story. And I want to remind you all, the very beginning of the words of St. John's Gospel tells us that the light overcomes the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. The oppressive darkness surrounding the world today, as terrible as it is, cannot overcome the light borne by the Blessed Virgin. She is the lighthouse for the world, guiding all ships to safe harbors. But we must pray and ask for help. So take up your arms and each day recite the prayers of the Most Holy Rosary and be ever ready to answer Our Lady's call to general quarters.